The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, came out and did a photo shoot on the steps of number 11 a short time ago. Lots of shouting of questions at her. She didn't answer any of them, but she did have a pretty wide grin. And I think there are a couple of observations worth making here. The first is that for a lot of these people who are walking up Downing Street for the first time into these really big jobs, it is quite a moment for them. You know, they're hit by this barrage of photographers shouting their name or shouting for them to turn to face the photographers. And a lot of them are walking really slowly. And I was talking with my producer, Ollie, earlier about why are they walking so slowly? Because it looks quite strange. I think it probably is to try and drink in that atmosphere. It's a real moment, actually, for a lot of these politicians they've been quite senior in Labour for a while, but they've never been in government before. This is a completely different new experience and probably something they would like to savour. But John, as you were referencing there, you know, we're starting to see these appointments of some of these departments where there are incredibly difficult problems. Where streeting, he's just had his photo go up online. All of them, by the way, do these quite strange school-style photo shoots where they're sort of grinning for the camera. He's got his up now, but he's going to have one of the most difficult jobs, trying to keep all the junior doctors in line, trying to work out new pay deals, trying to cut the waiting lists. I mean, the NHS is an absolute knotty, sort of difficult basket of problems, and Labour and Keir Starmer have made some pretty big promises on that front, which they're going to have to start to deliver quite quickly.
Yeah, I mean, as we sit here, Kate, the junior doctors are saying that they want a 35% pay rise. Not necessarily in a year, they're pretty clear about that. It can be phased. And we got Wes Streeting when he was a shadow minister. Now he's the Secretary of State, but his line has been we can't do 35%. So we'll see whether they can find a bridge between those points. And it's been pointed out the doctors of the BMA in Wales have now settled for 12.5%, and I think there'll be a hope maybe that is a bit of a bridge between the two sides, Kate.
I think they will certainly hope that, but the BMA, the junior doctors, are not going to give up on this 35% request, because what they're now saying is it doesn't have to happen in 1 year, it can happen over a course of 5 or 10 years, but ultimately they're not going to drop this demand of pay parity, which is them saying essentially our pay has been eroded over so many years that we want it to get back to where it ought to have been. So I don't think this is going to be an easy conversation for Labour to have, and don't forget, a lot of the things that Labour's promising when it comes to reorganising the NHS to make it work better are fundamental changes to the way that it works at the moment. Some of them are technology, some of them will be welcomed, but a lot of them will be quite difficult, including, just take one example, online appointments for GPs. Now that will be welcome because it will, of course, cut some of the waiting lists. That's what Labour hopes. But they'll need staff on side in order to deliver all of that, and that's not necessarily going to be easy. I think Labour is going to have a real battle on its hands with some of this stuff going forward, and it's not just in the NHS, by the way, where that is going to be the case. If you look across the board at almost every single department, there is a really knotty issue. For the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, now she'll have to deal with the police and police pay, she'll have to deal with prisons and probation. The probation service is on its knees, really not working well at all of these huge big problems that Labour is now having to solve for itself instead of standing in the House of Commons and accusing Tory ministers of not being able to solve. It's worth me just saying we've got the BMA on our Sunday show this week, so we will be putting to them exactly what they are going to demand from this new Labour government in the first couple of days. That will be up at the top of the list for Wes Streeting to deal with on Monday, I imagine.
Right, well, it's Friday now, so maybe by the time you talk to the BMA, they would have met. They should have met because they should have been in contact.
I mean, Wes Streeting was saying, and he said this sort of earlier this week, he was saying that, look, as soon as I get in there, if I become the health secretary, as soon as I get in there, one of the first phone calls I'm making is to the BMA. I'm getting my shirt sleeves up, I'm getting negotiating with them. So, you know, I think that's going to be something that they do hope, and that's certainly what he's indicated to me, that he hopes he can get a quick win on that. But as Kate, as you were saying, that will be difficult. You just mentioned Yvette Cooper there, and she's got an incredibly busy brief, but of course immigration will be high on that list, Kate. That's been such an important issue during this election campaign, and probably during those leadership debates. Keir Starmer was actually, you know, quite on the ropes when Rishi Sunak really pushed him on some of the immigration policy. How do you think Yvette Cooper is going to sort of handle all of that?
Keir Starmer was on the ropes, you're right, in some of those public TV debates, but this week in a question and answer session with employees in a factory, he also got asked a lot of questions about immigration, and they were very detailed questions. So Labour's policy on this is to scrap the Rwanda policy. They want to process all illegal migrants who are already in the country. They want to stop the use of hotels, and they want to deport people. Now, those are all aims that the Conservative Party has also signed up to, at least, you know, apart from the Rwanda, clearly, the party wants to deal with Rwanda in a different way. But in terms of trying to send people back, both parties share that as an aim. It hasn't happened, though, and there is a reason for that, because a lot of people who arrive in the UK illegally, they arrive from countries where you absolutely cannot deport them. And the question has always been for Labour, well, look, if you can't remove these tens of thousands of people, who are, by the way, housed in hotels paid for by the state, what happens to them? Because you can't detain them. We don't have any space to detain them. Why would you detain them? Because you'd be detaining them indefinitely. If you can't send them back to the country they came from, they will ultimately have to live in this country. That's tens of thousands of people. If you don't pay for their accommodation, they end up going to the council because they need accommodation. They end up homeless. If you look at the homelessness figures in the last 6 months or so, they have gone through the roof. Every which way you look at this problem, it presents a new problem for this new government to solve.
Yeah.
And Labour, Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer have as yet not been able to answer that question definitively. So for the next week or so, I expect Yvette Cooper will be getting into the Home Office, working out what she can and can't do, and exactly how they try and solve it, because it costs absolutely loads of money every single week.
I know we're piling questions on you, Kate, about 15 in the space of 5 minutes. But that goes with the territory of being political editor on a day like this and standing in Downing Street. Can I ask you this? We've had another appointment just in the last few moments. Bridget Phillipson has been confirmed as the Labour Education Secretary. Again, it's another one of those big appointments that went with the brief. I think Keir Starmer has purely just confirmed people in senior cabinet jobs taking over the role they had as shadow ministers. But at some point he's going to have to wield the knife, isn't he? Because he's got a cabinet to fill in number 10 Downing Street. He's got a shadow cabinet, which is too big. You can't have all those seats at the cabinet table. You can call some of them, I suppose, ministers attending cabinet, but there's going to have to be a little bit of ruthlessness, Kate, isn't there? As Margaret Thatcher said, he's got to learn to carve the joint.
That absolutely will, John. You're completely right. I think some of those problems can be solved by moving departments into one another. So maybe sort of moving departments, moving briefs around so you can encompass one thing under one name. Maybe you can sort of cut positions down that way. And Labour already has a bit of an issue because Thangam Debonair didn't win her seat, and nor did Jonathan Ashworth, which was a real surprise, I think. So although they'll have given themselves a bit of extra space with those two appointments, they will have been pretty sad, I think, to lose those two pretty senior members of what would have been Labour's cabinet. So you're right, there will have to be some trimming around the edges. We'll get most of the more junior ministerial positions tomorrow, we expect, but we could see some of those changes in the cabinet, the top level jobs today. And it is worth just noting on that, in terms of names and briefs, sorry Aisha, just quickly, Angela Rayner has retained the title of Secretary of State for Levelling Up. There had been some conversation around whether Labour would change that, whether they wouldn't keep using the word levelling up, whether they would change the title of that role because they felt that it had been tied to the Conservatives and it had not necessarily been delivered. They have kept it in this current announcement. I wonder if that might well be changed further down the line.
And just on the issue of Thangam Debonair and Jonathan Ashworth, both sort of losses, Kate, I've heard a rumour swirling that maybe they could tip up in the Lords, and maybe Thangam Debonair could be Culture Secretary from the Lords. It's felt by many that she would be a really good Culture Secretary. She's a classical cellist. She's done very well with the stakeholders. Do you think there could be any possibility of that?
I think it's certainly a possibility because Labour has made it clear that it does want to increase the number of peers it has in the House of Lords, because at the moment there is a disparity between the number of Conservatives in there and the number of Labour, and Lib Dems of course, the number of Labour peers that there are. If Labour wants to get on with delivering changes in government quite quickly, including things that need legislation, it will need to know that it can move things quickly through the House of Lords so that it can get on and prove to the British people that Keir Starmer has been able to deliver on his plan. So I wouldn't be surprised to see more Labour appointments. I also wouldn't be surprised to see these two appointments, and as you say, they could well take those senior roles from the House of Lords.
All right, Kate McCann, lovely to talk to you. Let's talk again very, very soon. I didn't know, Aisha, that Thangam Debonair was an expert cellist.
Yes, and in fact, on my Culture Hour, John, she came in with her beautiful cello and did like a concert for my listeners, and she is very accomplished as a cellist, and it's quite a rare thing to have a Culture Secretary that actually is quite steeped and immersed in culture.
Another bit of news for you from our red hot with gossip tent, and we have the news that Ed Miliband has been duly appointed the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero. Really would have been a shock had that not happened.
That would have been harsh. That would have been very harsh.
Dale Vincer was with us a short while. He'd have broken down in tears.
But just on that point, very quickly, very interesting Ed Miliband's journey. Remember, he was the first ever climate change secretary under the last Labour government. He was the person who basically helped Keir Starmer get his seat. So, I think, this is Keir Starmer sort of rewarding him a bit.
Right. Now, the aforementioned expert pianist, classical pianist and pollster, Scarlet Maguire from the Pollster Jail Partners, is with us in the tent. Hey, Scarlet, good to see you. Are you feeling very pleased with yourself? Your poll at Jail Partners was one of the closest to the money, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. We were I think the closest of the sort of the big pollsters. We think more in comes a think tank. So yeah, no, we're really pleased actually.
Right, and you look at the range of the polls. We spent the last I don't know how many weeks looking at opinion polls hour by hour. They came in a range. Labour's share of the vote, at the lower end, it ended up at around 14%, I think. At the upper end, it got as high as the mid 20s. So there was a big range there, even above that on one or two opinion polls. And the actual figure in the end was 12.
It was just under that actually. So Labour finished on just over 33%, and the Conservatives on 23.7. So it was actually just under 12. Yeah.
Right. So why? How did it go so wrong?
I think there's a few things going on here. First of all, I think it sort of squares that circle, because we've been talking for months about how Labour can be so far ahead in the polls when there's not much enthusiasm in the public necessarily for the party, sort of actively wanting to come in. And I think this is actually a sort of result that you get off the back of that. I think there's also tactical voting going on there. So we can see that the Liberal Democrats, obviously they've now, having previously called for voting reform, they've actually now done hugely well out of our first past the post system. They put on 0.6% of the vote and gained 60 seats. So there, I don't think they'll be complaining.
No. But did you see their party? They certainly were not complaining.
But Labour similarly have done incredibly well out of it. But I think a lot of that is so the Liberal Democrats were benefiting from people who were planning on voting Labour going to Liberal Democrats. But then also polls weren't picking up on the independent vote. So we had 5 MPs that went to independent candidates. That's the most since the 1950s. And there were another 5 that only just held on as well within the Labour Party to pro-Gaza independence.
All right. Scarlet Maguire, really great to talk to you. Let's talk again a little bit later on.
Nice. Cool.